Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with the hottest in budget deck technology. And for today's deck tech, we're of course going to be jumping into the Midweek Magic event. And what are we playing today? Let's see. Okay, so it's on the edge, so it looks like we're playing... Okay, we're going to build together a deck that's built around the latest 3 sets that have come out on Arena.
Bring it on.
Also, the main reason why I wanted to do this video is, since the last video was technically a non-budget one, I felt a little bit bad about that because I know some of you out there, of course, watch me purely for those budget decks. So, of course, we had to make it up by playing in the event this week. And again, we're playing something that's super duper ultra budget and actually very powerful in the standard format. So, without further ado, join me today as we're going to be playing a version of White Weenies in 2024 that I am simply calling Delney's Gang. But before we continue, if you do like any of the content that I do, please like, follow, and subscribe wherever you watch the content so you don't miss out on any of the gameplay, booster pack openings, deck decks, and so much more. Longtime viewers of the channel know how we do it. We have to talk about the stats of the deck before we dive right into it. So, our On the Edge deck, which is built around a standard set of cards, we're looking at a mono white deck that is having an average mana curve of about 1.9. Our creatures are looking at, 30 creatures, 8 enchantments, and only 22 lands. So what is Delney's Gang consisting of? Well, before we talk about that, let's actually talk about the card herself, because this card, of course, is one you all voted on, and of course, it's a really sweet card for White Weenie decks going into 2024. So Delney's Streetwise Lookout is a 3-mana 2/2 human scout that reads, creatures you control with power 2 or less can't be blocked by creatures power 3 or greater. If an ability of a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. Wow. Even in our deck that's as simple as can be, this is actually a really sweet option for us that can help you really power up a lot of your creatures and give us a ton of extra value for our deck. However, we're going to need a little bit of extra backup to ensure that our weenies also can do a little extra damage along the way.
I am not a weenie.
Relax, you're among friends.
So we also have another card here that we're building around, which is Sanguine Evangelist. So this 3-mana 2/1 Vampire Cleric that has Battle Cry reads, whenever it enters the battlefield or dies, you create a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying. It's a really sweet little ability here to give us a little bit of a go-wide strategy, but the Battle Cry mechanic here is really powerful because it says, when this creature attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So our flyers can do a lot of extra damage if we swing with the vampire. Unfortunately, however, the vampire itself does not have flying, so just keep that in mind when you do swing if you're trying to go for lethal. And with that out of the way, now let's talk about, of course, some of the creatures we're going to try to take advantage of the most here. So for this format, we're going to be utilizing Miner's Guidewing. We have Novice Inspector and Ruin Lurker Bat. All of these, of course, provide us some kind of trigger in some way, shape, or form whenever something happens, whether they enter the battlefield, such as the Novice Inspector gives us a clue token. With Miner's Guidewing, when it dies, it helps us explore. When Ruin Lurker Bat here, of course, at the beginning of our end steps, something descends, we could descry 1. All of them, again, will be able to trigger off of Delney, so keep that in mind as you progress through the match. In the 2-drop slot for creatures, we have Ironpaw Aspirant here. Nothing really crazy, of course, but adding at least 2 +1/+1 counters if we can get that trigger off of our lookout here is really sweet for us to power up one of our creatures. And of course, another creature here, our Neighborhood Guardian here, allows us to give us a little bit more pump to another one of our creatures, of course, when it enters the battlefield, as long as, of course, it has power 2 or less. Now, with that, we're going to need a little bit of extra support to make sure that our creatures don't just get blown up all the time, and we're going to, of course, have to deal with some of the bigger things that we obviously can't block in the early part of the game, at least not until Delney comes down. So with that, in the 2-drop slot, we will have Case of the Gateway Express. This is a really awesome card here that, of course, when it enters the battlefield, we basically get to pick a creature, and then we get to blow it up as long as we have a bunch of creatures on the battlefield. They'll each do 1 damage to that creature, so it's a great removal spell. And of course, once we, of course, solve the case, our creatures will also get an extra bit of pump of +1/+0, which is mimicking the Battle Cry ability that our Evangelist has. As far as dealing with bigger creatures that maybe we just can't deal with, or we don't have enough creatures on a battlefield, we'll have Petrify here as our aura here to enchant an artifact or creature, and of course it will turn off its abilities, and also it cannot attack or block. And then finally, the 3-drop slot, another card that can help us go wide if we can trigger off its ability thanks to Delney, Inside Source. So this 3-mana Human Citizen comes down and it will create a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. We don't really care about that secondary ability it has, but sometimes it might be helpful in a pinch. And to round out our super budget build for the Midweek Magic event, we only have 22 lands. We don't really need to worry about any kind of rare lands for this. Again, this is mostly, again, focused on the event, but if you do want to upgrade, if you have some more rare lands that you want to throw into the deck, by all means, you are welcome to do that to make this deck even more awesome than it is. As far as strategy goes, I don't really have too much I want to say about it, except if you've played any kind of White Weenies deck in the past, you more or less kind of should know how this is going to go. So obviously your 1 and 2 drops, throw them out there as fast as you can, and again, do as much damage as possible. Once you can get to Delney and you can start doubling up your triggers, you're going to get a ton of value off of your abilities. Again, if you have moments where maybe your Miner's Guidewing will die, put those extra counters on top of your Ruin Lurker Bat, since it does have lifelink to help stabilize yourself and do a lot of damage with an evasive creature. If you have those moments where you're able to get 2 clue tokens off a Novice Inspector, that'll give you enough card draw that'll help you keep fueling yourself and getting more action so you don't run dry. In those moments, however, the only tricky part about the deck is there's going to be moments where Delney may not have its ability trigger off because you've powered up your creatures with a Sanguine and Evangelist, or maybe you already powered yourself up with a case of the Gateway Express. However, don't fret about that, because again, for those of you who are experienced in playing White Weenies, your whole goal is to go as wide as you can, get a little bit of extra pump, and close out the game as fast as possible. Having said all that, there's of course a weakness that I have to address with the deck, which is if you cannot get to your removal in time and your opponent has bigger creatures than you can handle, or they sometimes have trample, you're gonna have a bad time. And of course, for those of you that are used to playing White Weenie decks, most of this shouldn't come as a surprise, but if your opponent also has Wraths, you're also gonna have a bad time. So keep those 2 things in mind, of course, when you are playing this style of deck. And with the strategy out of the way, here are my overall final thoughts I just want to give on the deck. I know we've played a ton of White Weenie decks over time on here, but I actually really am a big fan of the archetype because it's such a really low to the ground, cheap way of playing Magic. And for many of you out there who have seen many of my other variants of White Weenies, you've definitely seen this archetype has evolved quite a bit since we've been putting videos out there. So definitely play around with this. If you're a fan of the standard version we played today, there's definitely some cool options for you. If you're interested in maybe playing this in the Eternal format, as always, you'll see on screen right now as I've been talking, there are definitely other variants out there if you want to play it in Explorer, maybe even Historic. In the past couple of years, this archetype has grown so much, it's actually been harder for me to kind of figure out what are the best 1 and 2 drops for this style of deck. So I would definitely encourage all of you who are a fan of this style of archetype, experiment out there and see what works and what doesn't work, and let me know in the comments below if you're a fan of this, because I would love to hear from you. But my only other thing I'm just going to say is if you are a fan of Go Wide strategies, if you're a fan of White Weenies and maybe you're still wanting to play standard, definitely give this deck a try. And I assure you, when you get your wins in for the Midweek Magic event, you're definitely going to want to continue playing this deck. Maybe you might want to upgrade it to something more powerful while still keeping it in standard, or maybe if you want to play it in Explorer or anything beyond, you'll definitely have a lot of options to choose from, and I assure you, you will not be disappointed. That's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later!